Hello there. Coming to you live from the bunker. This is episode 23 of Watchtower in Focus, the show that zooms in on all things Watchtower, bringing the governing body and its teachings and policies under microscopic scrutiny. Back in episode 21, we revealed how an increasingly litigious Watchtower is using a bold new strategy of subpoena warfare in its efforts to stifle criticism of its teachings and practices. In recent months, dozens of subpoenas have been issued by Watchtower to internet giants like Google, Facebook, and Reddit, requesting information identifying otherwise anonymous whistleblowers who have posted information the organization considers to be copyrighted. This is in addition to cease and desist letters being sent to known activists like yours truly, threatening legal action over use of copyrighted content. But with the help of the EFF, or Electronic Frontier Foundation, one XJW activist is fighting back. Reddit user Darkspilver has issued a motion to quash Watchtower's attempts to subpoena their information, and Watchtower has responded with a 48-page document defending their attempted violation of Darkspilver's privacy. Joining me to discuss this remarkable turn of events is my regular co-host, Mark O'Donnell, otherwise known as John Redwood. Standing in for my other regular co-host, Covert Fade, is friend of the show and filmmaker Javier Ortiz, and lending his considerable expertise in deciphering this complicated matter is copyright lawyer and YouTuber. I had no idea those things existed. Leonard J. French from the YouTube channel Lawful Masses with Leonard French. Mark, Javier, and Leonard, welcome.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Thank you, man. Good to be on again.
Thanks, Lloyd. Good to be here.
That was such a long intro. And gosh, I have to just repeat, Leonard, I didn't know until literally yesterday that there was such a thing as a copyright lawyer stroke YouTuber. So thank you for existing.
Oh, you're very welcome. I think I'm one of a handful, very few, who choose to live our practices or practice this way and also have a YouTube channel.
Are you picking them up?
Yeah, we're picking him up, Javier. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just astonishing, and you're very welcome as well, because this is such a complicated issue to get our heads around, but so pressing because, as I mentioned, this affects ordinary kind of ex-JW whistleblowers who are rightly concerned about an increasingly litigious Watchtower essentially using copyright law to hunt them down. So just to add more flesh to the bones, Mark, could you kind of summarize what this objection is? So first of all, there was the motion to quash. Maybe I should just back up a bit. This is not a lawsuit. This is Watchtower issuing a subpoena to get someone's information so that they could, if they wanted to, mount a lawsuit.
Right.
Is that right? Yeah.
So we're talking about something that's gone back since the middle of 2017, where Watchtower has begun issuing subpoenas, and it's a very special kind of subpoena. It's a tool that is known as the DMCA subpoena. And actually, this is a tool that started back during the Napster music sharing service days. And really what it was is the courts needed, and I think Leonard will comment on this too, the courts needed to have a tool in order to identify the infringers of the musical content that was effectively being stolen, or was claimed to have been stolen and then shared on the internet. And so the music companies were fighting back, and they developed this tool, which Watchtower has decided to use for their own benefit. And there is, of course, a big difference between what Watchtower is doing with this tool and with what the music industry does with the DMCA subpoena and Napster And I would say the largest difference is the fact that Watchtower is not being financially impacted by this because they are supposed to be a 501c3 charity, and yet they are using this tool to go after dozens and dozens of individuals who Watchtower has perceived to be apostates and have posted an image or a spreadsheet or a video or some content which either appears on their website or which is private content that Watchtower does not want the public to know about. So to give you an example of private content, it might be a body of elders letter. It could be a video with maybe it's, for example, the Pillowgate videos that were designed for Bethelites only. So there's a lot of content, and what Watchtower of Pennsylvania is doing is that they are identifying those individuals who they believe are leaking content and may have links back to the original leak source or the moles within their organization who are leaking this information out to the public. So just to be clear, they're not going after rank
Just
and file
anyone.
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah,
right.
it's focused mainly on stopping the leaks. But Leonard, you have actually put out 2 videos on your channel, one of which is nearly 2 hours long, in which you go into quite some detail in analyzing particularly Watchtower's objection to the motion to quash. As a copyright lawyer, how would you describe what you're seeing here?
I would describe it as a very tenuous copyright case. It seems, as you look further and further into it, there's less and less of a link to copyright, and it seems more like copyright is being used as a stepping stone to get to some other objective, like the other speaker was talking about, in this case, of rooting out a mole or leak. The actual content of the leak doesn't seem to be a very strong copyright. So instead, the law is being used in a very technical way, but not a very substantive way, or not in the spirit of the law. And that if the court grants the technicality, then yes, the information would be able to be subpoenaed, and that seems to be their entire goal. I don't see there being much of a copyright remedy here, so that sort of betrays the motivation of the organization that's sending these kinds of subpoenas.
We'll get into the kind of what the whole claim focuses on, because I find it fascinating just what they've gone after, which I think, again, it's not the typical thing that you could imagine copyright law being invoked to defend. But tell me what you think about kind of the document itself. How would you describe the robustness of Watchtower's arguments compared to what you would typically find in this sort of document?
Sure. The copyright claim involves. Oh yes, that typical copyright claim involves a substantive claim. Somebody's infringing music or a movie or work of art or a book or article or writing of some kind. This seems to be more targeted at the items of a flyer and a spreadsheet or chart that chart that contains mostly factual information. Those aren't typically things that we're terribly concerned about with copyright, unless that flyer itself is some sort of artistic work or something, which at a very bare minimum it is, but not really any farther than a very bare minimum. And that's not always the kind of thing that courts like to protect with Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution.
Sure. Mark, you have the ability, I believe, we've kind of practiced this, and we're hoping to do a screen share. And Mark has available for viewers the original kind of motion to quash. So in other words, Watchtower issues a subpoena saying, we want this person's information, and some time passes, too much time according to Watchtower, and Darkspilver manages to get hold of a lawyer and together with the lawyer, they file a motion to quash the subpoena. And it's what we're mostly going to be talking about is the document that Watchtower then filed in response to that. But in Mark, in the motion to quash, there are some exhibits which actually show what this whole thing is about, which Leonard just alluded to. But I think it would be interesting for viewers to see what this whole debacle is about to begin with, because as Leonard says, these are not documents that you would typically expect any sort of creator to be jumping up and down about and saying, oh, I'm being grievously damaged by this being shared. Do we have the ability to screen share those exhibits?
Yeah, so let's see if we can make that happen here.
Yeah, a Doctor Who moment there by the looks of things.
I am not sure what's happening there. Let's see here. That didn't happen during the...
Hot off the heels of the discovery of what a black hole looks like, it seems that we are flying into one ourselves. So if you just bear with us, yeah, we're getting there, it seems.
Okay, so let's see if we can find the correct document. I have to warn our viewers that we have hundreds and hundreds of documents, and we will try to zero in. Let's see, this is a recent document that was just filed 3 days ago in the court, which is actually Watchtower's opposition to the motion to quash. And I think what you're asking about is the motion to quash itself.
Yeah, it has some exhibits.
Yeah, so let's jump into that. Let's see. First of all, this document here was filed March 26th, and this is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF's Notice of Motion and Motion to Quash Watchtower's subpoena to Reddit, seeking identifying information. So, just to let everybody know what's going on here, this is a very lengthy process. Of course, Watchtower does not want this to be a lengthy process. They want to identify any infringer of their content or an apostate posting their content and get that person's name, email address, IP address, which locates their computer location as near as possible. And they want to take that information and identify if there's a pattern between the dozens of subpoenas, so that they can identify, who the mole is. And the reality is that we don't know if any of these people are the sources of the leaks. So, what we've got here is the motion to quash. So Watchtower's gone after. And first of all, I would mention too that the information was taken down. So really, there's not much of a threat to Watchtower in that whenever this information gets posted on a place like Google or Reddit or YouTube, these are United States entities. And Watchtower has been able to convince judges in New York and California to, first of all, remove the content under the DMCA Millennium Copyright Act. So they get the content removed right away. But here's where it gets interesting. They don't stop at removing the content. They are going after the identity.
I'm just interested in knowing what the content is, because I think that it would be interesting for viewers. I'm just floored when I look at what Darkspilver actually posted, because Leonard's just said this is not the typical material that the organizations hire lawyers to defend the copyright of. So can we see those documents? Can we see those images that were shared on Reddit?
Yeah, so let's take a look at this one here, and you'll let me know if you're able to see that on your screens. Okay. So this is one of the images that was posted on Reddit by Darkspilver, and what this is an image from, let's see here. It looks like this was the Watchtower.
This was from the back page of a Watchtower, and it's literally an image encouraging people to donate.
Yeah, so here's where free speech comes in. So this user, Darkspilver, is anonymous, and he's anonymous because he doesn't want to be disfellowshipped. He's protecting his identity. So he wants to use his free speech to say, look, the Jehovah's Witnesses have taken out an entire full-page ad on the back of their Watchtower magazine, and it's all about giving gifts to Jehovah, how to donate, how to give money through various means, jw.org, JW Library, etc. And so, this was of concern to him. He wanted to post it. His commentary that went along with this had to do with, take a look at this. This is what Watchtower is doing.
Did you see the commentary? Because it's now been deleted.
Yeah. So we're going to go through and see if we can locate that. And
Well,
as I
anyway,
understand,
just to kind of move things along, can you also show the chart? Because this whole lawsuit focuses on what we've just seen, which is the flyer from the back page of the magazine about donating, and it would also be helpful if viewers could just see the chart that is also the subject of this copyright claim.
Yeah, let's see if we can.
Leonard made some really good. I spent an hour and 40 minutes watching Leonard's video, which really kind of goes just from a legal standpoint. As someone who doesn't know much about the law, it's a fascinating video to watch, and I'll put a link in the description for those who want to watch it. But Leonard made some very interesting comments about the nature of the documents themselves and introduced me to a concept of copyright law that I wasn't familiar with before. So, sorry, there's this chart. I'll stop talking so people can see it.
Yeah, and Leonard, feel free to comment on that, and Javier as well. So, this was a document that was compiled, and perhaps Leonard, I think you went into good detail on this, and we'd love to get your outside opinion of this chart and what it contains.
Sure. It looks like it's referring to Article 30, which is an EU directive called the GDPR, General Data Privacy Regulation, I believe. And it regulates how organizations are supposed to handle the private data of the people or customers or users of their sites. So this is more of a document of internal company policies. And one of the points I was making about copyright law is copyright does not protect individual facts. It can protect an arrangement of facts. It is possible a chart could be copyright protected, but it would have to be some kind of creative work. The individual facts would have to be arranged in some kind of creative way, and simply listing data in a table or facts in a table is not necessarily a copyrightable work, or it receives a very bare minimum of copyright protection. So this chart seems to be just a chart of internal company policies.
You used an interesting expression, though, Leonard, which was de minimis. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a legal doctrine. It's a Latin phrase that basically means that there's minimal use, or such a small use that there really is no legal remedy, that a court might not want to waste anyone's time over such a trivial matter.
And
courts are bound, especially federal courts.
Would it be fair to say that both of these instances, but probably most especially the chart, in your opinion, could fall under that doctrine?
Yes, I personally and professionally feel that there's a very strong argument for both de minimis use in the flyer and the chart. The flyer at least has some creative elements to it, but we can then kind of go on to a fair use analysis later on that one. And the fair use analysis also seems almost trivial. Not necessarily that the analysis falls trivially in one direction or the other, but that when you start to get into the fair use factors, this really doesn't hit the factors the way they're supposed to be hit, because it's not being used in its copyright protected manner. The way the subpoena is phrased and the way that this chart, or the way that the flyer and the chart were used, seem to be disconnected from each other.
Indeed. Now, I'm going to bring in Javier because, first of all, we are having some technical difficulties. This is quite an unusual live stream because Leonard is literally joining us from a train. So he's done really well to impart his wisdom despite literally being in transit. And Javier, who is joining the live chat from LA, for some reason can't hear what Leonard is saying at the moment. We're currently working on it. But what Javier can do is monitor the live chat. So Javier, well, first of all, by all means, share your thoughts on what you've been able to hear, but also let us know what's happening in the live chat.
Just my brief thoughts on what I've read so far on that subpoena document. It's the best way I can describe it is petty. And we've had our chats about it, and they're going really hard after these people. But what is the harm being caused to them, right? I think I saw some of the verbiage in the document was that by having Watchtower material spread online, that somehow was going to affect their readership of their material. And it's like, isn't that the opposite? Didn't they make their organization based on spreading their literature everywhere?
An organization that relies upon its materials being distributed would be grateful of anyone who does distribute them,
Exactly. And so what it is they're being petty. You can be critical, but the minute you use their literature or their material, then they and you're doing it anonymously, then they care all of a sudden. But yeah, I haven't had. There's a lot of commenting going on in the live chat. There's a question here. It's more of a statement from Savage Gray Wolf. He says, "Can we note that this is so petty that they probably don't actually want to sue Darkspilver, but just DF him?" And that's. I mean, what do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is that Leonard picked up on this as well. It's kind of in his videos. That is, it's almost kind of transparent looking at it. That this, I mean, there's so little, if any, damage that Watchtower has suffered. You have to look at ulterior motives, and the clear one is that they just don't like being criticized, and they want to either threaten or punish someone who is criticizing them.
So there's a case or controversy requirement in federal law where a court is only allowed to remedy a case or controversy.
Sorry, Javier. You can't hear Leonard, but Leonard was just talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I can't hear him. Sorry about that.
That's got to be difficult. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
but so a court can't remedy something that's not a present case or controversy that can be remedied by a court ruling. So what court ruling exactly can remedy what damage are they receiving? So they need to make some kind of claim for damages, and I'm having a difficult time seeing what their damage is. Now, that there is another technicality, though, to the copyright law, which makes this more complicated. They have registered the copyright on at least the flyer, and that means that they would have access to statutory damages, which means they don't need to prove actual damages. So that becomes another factor for the EFF and Darkspilver and Watchtower to overcome. They all have to explain how they're calculating damages. The EFF and Darkspilver will want to say that there is no damage here, and therefore a court really can't issue a remedy, even if there is some kind of copyright infringement. It's so minimal that there's no damage and therefore no remedy, and therefore the whole thing is moot or not ripe. There's two sides to this. Either it hasn't ripened for controversy yet or for adjudication yet, or it is so minimal it's already over and therefore not remediable.
Okay, so just to help you out, Javier, I am muting you whenever Leonard is talking, so that should at least eliminate the possibilities of you speaking over him, which I know you don't intend to do by any means. Are there any other questions or comments in the live chat?
So while Javier is looking at the live chat, I thought I would mention that so there were two responses from Watchtower, and one of them was the 48-page document referred to by Leonard, and we actually believe that may have been a duplication of two 24-page documents. There seems to be an error there, but it's a very long document.
I agree.
Nonetheless. And secondly, in addition to that 24 to 48-page document, there is a second document, which is the direct declaration by Watchtower attorney Paul Polidoro. And I thought I would mention to the audience that Polidoro, obviously with Phil Brumley, is very aggressively going after these individuals who are posting this innocuous content, although they're concerned about the leaked content portion. However, Polidoro, for those that don't know this, is the attorney that was involved in the Stratton, Ohio Supreme Court case some years ago. And so he actually argued before the Supreme Court on behalf of Jehovah's Witnesses, so that the case would involve the law of whether or not a municipality had the right to require a permit of those people of Jehovah's Witnesses or anyone soliciting or going from door to door. And so Jehovah's Witnesses won that case. They're very proud of that they don't have to get a permit to do their door-to-door work in any municipality. And basically, it's that no municipality may override this federal decision. So Apollodoro is obviously involved now in these dozens and dozens of cases. And so he made a declaration just 3 days ago in this case. And I'm going to read just a small section of it here I feel is significant. So it's item number 10 in Apollodoro's declaration. It says, and by the way, this is in response to Darkspilver's allegation that he could be disfellowshipped for being exposed as an apostate and one who posts this information. So Watchtower and Apollodoro say, quote, Watchtower is not Darkspilver's local church and has no ability to excommunicate him from his local congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Which is not true.
Yeah, and we can talk about that all day.
But it's worth pointing out that they absolutely do have the authority to arrange for him to be disfellowshipped.
Right, and you see,
it's
Lloyd,
astonishing that they would say that they don't.
Well, you see, it's a technicality because this is Watchtower of Pennsylvania. And again, this goes back to all the child abuse cases where they are separating Watchtower, Pennsylvania, Watchtower, New York, Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, the local congregation, the branch organization, or the branch committee.
So much of a technicality that it's quite frankly a lie. You get to the point where, you know, it's just so disingenuous that it might as well be a flat-out lie. Yeah,
it is a lie, and it's because all of these organizations are alter egos of each other, and that is something that has been brought out by multiple court cases, particularly the child abuse court cases, where Watchtower is trying to confuse and obfuscate to the jury or to the court, and the reality is that they're all alter egos of each other. But nonetheless, they're saying Watchtower can't excommunicate a person. It goes on to say, not a single person that has been the subject of a Watchtower sought DMCA subpoena has been excommunicated from their local church as a result of Watchtower obtaining their identity from a DMCA subpoena. And it goes on to say, some of the subjects of Watchtower's DMCA were active Jehovah's Witnesses before they became the subject of a Watchtower DMCA subpoena, and remained active Jehovah's Witnesses after Watchtower received identifying information about them.
Some of them did.
There's a whole lot of information there to unpack, but I'd like to mention this to Leonard and see his thoughts on it. The thing that jumps out at me the most here is the fact that Watchtower, on the one hand, is trying to separate itself from the rest of the organization and say that it has no ability to excommunicate a Jehovah's Witness that received one of these subpoenas. It has no ability to do that, implying that it doesn't have records on this individual. It has no ability to do that. Well, when you say that this organization has no ability to do that, that means that they don't have a connection to this individual, that they don't control the congregation. These are the claims that they're making. Yet, my question to Watchtower and to the court is, how in the world do they then go on to make the statement that no single person has been excommunicated as a result of a DMCA subpoena? How would they know that without going into congregation records?
I'm curious about that, Mark, because that could be a very specific play on words, right? Oh, am I muted?
We can hear you.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because they can say that no one has been disfellowshipped as a result of the order, right? Which is technically true, because they wouldn't be disfellowshipped for having posted something online or having received that order. There would be disfellowship for reasons that are part of their internal legal issues. So I guess apostasy or I don't know, I'm not listening to the elders or something, but it wouldn't be specifically for that reason. So in legal paperwork, they can say no one has been disfellowshipped because of this. Could that be the case?
Well, and my question is really, how is it that they're getting that information? Because they're claiming to be separate from everyone else. So again, for those that don't know, Watchtower of Pennsylvania is the copyright holder or the claimed copyright holder of all of their literary works. And Watchtower of New York is the holder of properties or the owner of properties. And then you have all the other organizations such as the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, which is another 501c3 that's set up completely separate from these organizations. But the Christian Congregation would be the one that controls the elder bodies, and they would have the information on whether or not a ministerial servant or an elder has been appointed, deleted, disfellowshipped, or an individual congregation member has been punished, disfellowshipped, excommunicated, whatever you want to call it. So the fact is, it's sort of like the legal principle of estoppel, where they're making one argument, but they're essentially contradicting themselves because they want to claim that they're no part of this of the other organizations such as CCJW, and yet they're also at the same time claiming that they have access. They've literally said in this statement here that they know for a fact, and they have no supporting evidence, by the way, they know for a fact that these individuals have not, and there's more than 50 of them at least, they have not been excommunicated as a result of the DMCA subpoena. So I think that this is going to be an issue for them when this goes back and gets resolved in the month of May, which I understand to be the next date on the docket to get this matter resolved.
Leonard, how convinced are you, given the fact that when you read the original motion to quash, Darkspilver is quite clearly very concerned about ramifications through religious ramifications of being disfellowshipped. How convincing do you think Watchtower was in its response that there is no threat?
I was not personally or professionally convinced. There's a couple things. First, the affidavit or declaration is from the attorney. That's not typically the way that we do it. The attorney usually only makes an affidavit to say things like, I served properly on this date, or I sent this, or I filed this on this date. Generally, we want a declaration from a party witness, so someone from Watchtower, not their in-house counsel. Second, there is something called Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 11, which says that when an attorney signs papers, they've done their due diligence investigation into the truth or veracity of those allegations. And so by asserting that, the attorney is opening themselves up to a motion for sanctions under Rule 11 or a motion for contempt or something for having filed something without knowing 100%. So if it later on turns out that someone either has been disfellowshipped or that information isn't exactly accurate, the EFF can point that out, and Darkspilver can point that out, and even make a motion for sanctions or contempt.
Right. And what concerns me as well is that it's still a relatively new thing, this whole issue of subpoena warfare. It traces back to maybe the beginning of last year, the beginning of 2018. We kind of figured out in our episode where we discussed this for the first time. And so it's still a relatively new thing where literally dozens of individuals, and we're going to reveal another individual later in the show who's also been targeted in this way, who goes into some detail on what the ramifications have been. It's a relatively new thing for individuals to be targeted. So I find it odd that one of Watchtower's arguments is, well, we've not disfellowshipped anyone yet, because what's to stop them after all of this, after the dust has settled and after they've, say, got their subpoena, what's to stop them then disfellowshipping Darkspilver? What recourse would Darkspilver have to then, I don't know, hold them in contempt of court? Have we lost
I
Leonard?
might need you to repeat that last part.
Yeah, so
just a moment.
let's say hypothetically speaking, because Watchtower's argument is, oh, well, we've not disfellowshipped anyone yet, so therefore we're the good guys. What would happen if Watchtower did manage to subpoena the information, did disfellowship Darkspilver? Presumably, Darkspilver wouldn't then have recourse to return to that court and say they did exactly what they said they weren't going to do. Can we punish them?
Yeah, they wouldn't have a whole lot of recourse. Once the case or controversy is over, it's now moot. So it might not be something that's, again, remediable at law. You can't exactly tell a religious organization you can't kick this guy out. Once they know who the person is, there's nothing there's really nothing to stop them from kicking them out under really any rule of their own. It has nothing to do with a court rule or court order or anything. If the issue really is Darkspilver's identity, once they have it, there's nothing more a court can really do.
So it's kind of irrelevant for them to say, oh, we promise we'll behave, isn't it? Because the whole point is that they have the power to do that, and based on documented evidence, Darkspilver is concerned that they'll do that. Surely that's enough for a judge. So
is it possible that they're making those statements? And Leonard, you would know more than me, but because they want to make sure that they're not in violation of any whistleblower protection laws in the States?
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't know the first thing about whistleblower protection laws in the States. I'll admit that right away before we go down that hole, expecting me to have expertise on that. I apologize for not knowing that off the top of my head, but I don't know what whistleblower protections there would be for that kind of thing.
No problem.
Now, if he was revealing some, he or she was revealing some facts about child abuse or something like that, don't really know what those protections are, state by state or federally.
I just want to ask a question, Leonard, about fair use. And by the way, it's worth acknowledging for viewers, we do seem to be having a bit more of a deterioration on Leonard's line, but he seems to be clinging on. So thank you, Leonard. And apparently now Javier can hear what Leonard is saying. So we have made some progress.
And I'll be getting to a more secure area in just a moment here.
Wonderful. Excellent. I do have some questions, Leonard, and I'll just battle through a couple of them. In your video, your 1 hour, 40-minute odd video, you talk a lot about fair use and about how fair use isn't really dealt with in Watchtower's objection to any satisfactory degree, but you also comment that there is some argument to be made that by posting what we've just seen and not offering commentary, Darkspilver does fall foul of the fair use requirement. But what's interesting is that when you actually go onto Reddit and hunt down the posts in question, Darkspilver has deleted, it seems, the original comments accompanying his post. If you were legally advising Darkspilver, would you have advised him not to delete his Reddit comments?
He can still delete the Reddit comments. I think we would just want to make sure we had a copy of what was posted before it got deleted for our evidentiary records, and to be able to turn that into a court. There's two kind of. Oh, 1 sec.
Okay.
They're making announcements, so I wanted to mute myself. So if. Sorry, this is just bad timing. I'll just wait 1 second for me.
No, I'll tell you what I'll do, Leonard. While you're muting, I'm just going to read a section here on fair use, and this is from Watchtower's own statement here. It says, by way of a time-barred motion to quash, Darkspilver seeks to shield admitted infringement of Watchtower's copyrighted works by invoking the First Amendment rights to which he is not entitled in a court that, by its own admission, does not have the requisite personal jurisdiction to adjudicate the copyright infringement claim. And then it says, under the cloak of fair use, Darkspilver's untimely motion to quash also invites this court to foreclose copyright protection to all non-commercial works. Should the court accept this invitation, it would essentially write non-commercial creative works out of the Copyright Act, which is US 17, Section 100, altogether. Watchtower respectfully urges the court to honor Article 1, Section 8 of the US Constitution and the DMCA Act and ignore Darkspilver's motion to quash. So what they're saying there is that if they allow Darkspilver to make his claim regarding fair use, that his claim is that he's not harming them financially because it's a non-commercial work. So they're saying if you open that door and allow him to, let's say, post a Watchtower page that they consider copyrighted, then it's going to open the floodgates and it's going to allow all sorts of abuses of the system. And this is what Watchtower's argument is, as I understand it.
The courts don't have to issue this opinion as a precedential opinion. They issue what's known as either an unpublished opinion or simply note in the opinion that they don't consider this to be a precedential case. And then that sort of eliminates any slippery slope argument that this is the end of the Copyright Act because Darkspilver was able to overcome by having posted something that only damages a charity. I don't see the argument from a legal perspective. The argument that's much stronger for me is if they would explain how they are being damaged, and the explanations they've given so far are very tenuous at best, that somehow their website traffic will be reduced if people are able to read that flyer outside of their website, which is a very strange argument because the flyer directs people to the website to make donations, and that seems to be the purpose of the flyer, not to act as a website billboard, but rather act as a director to another website.
Well, let me read that statement, Leonard.
Go ahead.
I'll read that statement and jump right back to you. So the statement that Watchtower is making is, if widespread unauthorized reproduction and display of Watchtower's works online were permitted, there would be virtually no need to visit Watchtower's website, jw.org. Diverting traffic away from Watchtower's website could result in a significant decline in readership of Watchtower content. That is their statement. Let that sink in.
Yeah, I think that second sentence is more or less a truism. Yes, if something was able to divert traffic away from their website, they would have less traffic. Yes, but that first statement is a false premise in my humble opinion.
Well, it is because
that's a weird one because if unless they were harmed financially by having less traffic on their site, which if they're putting this information out, this content out for free, it's not like they're monetizing it like on YouTube or any of these other distribution methods. How are they harmed, right? Their whole existence comes from the fact that they were giving out magazines for, well, not always for free, but they're putting their material out there and they want people to read it. So if there's more sources for people to read this information, how does that harm them in any way?
Well, so you know what? That's a very interesting point you bring up, Javier, because number one, we already know that Jehovah's Witnesses are instructed never to visit an apostate site. So we can see from this that they're not really as concerned. I know they're concerned, but not as concerned about active witnesses reading it. But more importantly, they are concerned about future witnesses or persons studying with the organization who might be diverted away from jw.org and start reading apostate material and realize that, you know, there's absolute nuttiness and nonsense and irrational things going on with the Jehovah's Witness organization. So I think that really speaks to what they're talking about when they say diverting traffic could result in a decline in readership of Watchtower's content. But it's so generalized. It really is just a really over-the-top statement. Wouldn't you say, Lloyd? Just so over the top.
Well, yeah, and as has been pointed out, how does Watchtower suffer by? I mean, I don't think they do have less traffic to their website as a result of some guy on Reddit posting a page of the magazine. But even if they did suffer less traffic, how does that harm them when their website isn't monetized? But I did have another question, Leonard, and this is kind of coming more from my perspective as a creator who uses a lot of Watchtower copyrighted material to make his arguments against the organization. My understanding of copyright law is that anyone who features copyrighted work in their own work, fair use or not, exposes themselves to the potential of being sued for infringement. And there are obvious reasons why a large religious organization with significant legal resources would be interested in suing on grounds of infringement, if only to overwhelm and demotivate critics from using their own intellectual property against them. Do you consider this an abuse of copyright law? And if so, do you think reforms to copyright law may be needed in response to this problem?
Well, yes, reforms are definitely needed to copyright law in general to overcome the problem of trying to balance plaintiffs' rights in preventing infringement, but also users' rights in not having their speech or their use of copyright, their proper use of copyright, stifled by overly heavy copyright laws and an overly heavy enforcement action. One other thing I wanted to add, hope the wind isn't too much, I'll be inside in just a moment. One other thing I wanted to add, the church has to be careful, Watchtower has to be careful what kind of damage arguments they make here. If the argument is people are going to see this and decide that they don't like our church, well, that reinforces the fair use criticism argument, that Darkspilver is making comments and criticism, and if people happen to avoid the church because they saw this, and that kind of damage is what the Watchtower cites or claims, that seems to me to reinforce that this is a fair use, because there would have to be criticism and commentary that the church doesn't want you to see in order to have that kind of damage of a drop off in congregants or fellowship or membership because people read the criticism or commentary. That is not the kind of criticism or commentary that copyright is designed to offend, but rather fair use is designed to protect. So we want fair use to protect criticisms of churches, of newspapers, of presidents, of politicians, basically anybody, even me. People could use my copyrighted material, your copyrighted material, to make criticism of you. And as long as they follow the rest of the fair use factors, they're probably well within fair use.
Indeed. In my cease and desist letter, I got a letter for sharing a very, very embarrassing video that Watchtower actually only created for its staff members. It wasn't intended for ordinary rank and file members to see, and it was talking all about masturbation and the rules regarding sex and that kind of thing. And rather than just release the video on its own, I interspersed it with my commentary, and I had a letter from Watchtower threatening me with legal action if I didn't take the video down. And in my reply to them, I didn't have a lawyer at the time. I just kind of thought about it and replied and said, what you're asking me to do is just not criticize you, because I can't just talk about this video without showing it and expect people to believe that it exists. It literally needs to be seen to be believed. So what you're asking me to do is not criticize you. And I actually never got a reply to that letter, which I'm grateful of. But do you think that they kind of are mindful of fair use and what their limitations are, but where possible, again, it's more about a mole hunt and threatening people who they can threaten?
Yes, they are looking. They're using this. They're walking the line. They're walking a tightrope between claiming too much in damages that shows the criticism, and claiming nothing, which shows mootness or no case in controversy.
Indeed. And Javier, sorry, I'm just mindful of the live chat. I'm just mindful of the live chat and the fact that we haven't managed to include nearly as many questions as I would have liked. Javier, have you managed to capture any of those questions?
Yes, there's a couple of questions. Some of them are pretty interesting. So, Mersini Papadaki asked, do you think the whole subpoena thing is an idea that they got from Scientology? Which is an interesting question, right? Because it seems that this approach is very familiar to Scientology. So I'll throw that one out there.
Leonard?
Yes, I'm not familiar with the subpoena situation with Scientology. Lawyers definitely pay attention to what other organizations are doing. And in my line of copyright work, we often deal with a copyright troll who's sending a different kind of subpoena, but still filing a lawsuit under copyright law. And they're seeking identities pre-complaint or pre-service of the complaint. And that means that they're going out of order. So seeing how other attorneys have used the DMCA, how they've used copyright law, yes, that's exactly how attorneys get the idea to do these things in the first place to begin with.
Interesting. So can I read one more there,
Yes,
Lloyd?
please do.
And this one might be for you and Mark, because it's important to talk about this, right? Colin Zafke asks, why in the hell would you remain a JW and be leaking info?
That's a good question, isn't it? Why would you leak info as a JW? I guess what needs to be taken into consideration is that there's such thing as a physically in, mentally out JW and a physically in, mentally in JW. So if you are mentally in other words, you're indoctrinated and you still believe everything that Watchtower is telling you, you wouldn't have any reason to leak information. But due to the shunning policy and the fact that dissidents are separated from their families and thus essentially held captive within the organization, that creates a scenario where you do have people who are motivated to do what they can from within those kind of prison bars, if that makes sense. So I think that kind of describes a number of those who the Watchtower has gone after with these subpoenas. In fact, we have another example, Mark. Maybe now will be a good time to show a document that we literally received a few seconds before we went on air from another whistleblower who has been on the receiving end of subpoenas from Watchtower, and he's actually supplied us with a statement. Can we read that, Mark?
Yes. So yes. Okay. Wow, we've got so many documents here that I was thinking about the Dutch document, but we'll get to that later.
We've all read the Atlantic article, Mark, and we know that you're drowning in documents, but
yeah, indeed I am. So let's find this document here. I do have it, and here we go. So let's go ahead and get ready for a screen share. Thanks, Lloyd. Drowning in documents is an understatement. While I'm pulling that up, I would say that to, also answer that question that Javier read from the user, we have quite a number of people inside the organization, such as elders, who are very concerned about the child abuse problem, and they are very afraid of what is happening with these child abuse victims. So what they're trying to do is leak some of these documents out of goodwill and out of the desire to create transparency and help child abuse victims. So, Watchtower is trying to plug those leaks, and it's just not happening because there's just too many of them, and the dam is breaking. So let's do a screen share here, and
this might be good for Leonard as well, because Leonard, you're obviously familiar with this one case with Darkspilver, but now we're going to show you another case, albeit not the legal documents per se, but at least a statement from someone else who's been on the receiving end of this treatment.
So we have a statement here. I don't know how much of this you want read, Lloyd. This is from Faye Dare, who is one of the recipients of one of the dozens of subpoenas issued in the past year. Okay.
I think you're going to have to read at least part of it, and I might have to cut you off because it is a long statement, but it will only appear on when you're talking, so you need to read it.
Okay, so got it. So here's what I'll do, and then you can interrupt me. So
Yeah.
the document says, Faye Dare, my log of being hounded by Watchtower for leaking their propaganda. In 2017, after waking up from 5 decades of Jehovah's Witnesses lies, my wife and I decided to fade. We legally revoked our permission for Watchtower, Jehovah's Witnesses, to store or pass on our data. Then we not only moved area, but we moved to a new country. We naively thought that we had a clean break from Watchtower until I leaked some file online that embarrassed them. Some of the videos I leaked revealed Watchtower's U-turn on its claim to need money to build meeting places, instead revealing their master plan to sell off property. Watchtower reacted by issuing 2 subpoenas to obtain the identity of my pseudonym, Faye Dare. Once they obtained my IP address, once they obtained my IP address, they soon discovered my home address. It was time to let the dogs out. Watchtower ignored our legal instruction to delete our data, to not pass on our data. Instead, they sent 5 decades worth of personal data to a Jehovah's Witness elder in the country we had moved to. Here he is, Mr. Werner Wiegraf. On Saturday, January 19th, 2019, he and his collaborator elder stalked our home, persistently knocking our door 3 times until finally my wife answered the door. They revealed her name, her personal details about her history with the religion, pioneer records, and so on, and claimed that they wanted to come inside and, quote, offer encouragement. They lyingly claimed that they were visiting for benign pastoral reasons as ministers. When my wife instructed them, quote, if you have anything to say, put it in writing, their tone turned along with their facial expressions. They said, your husband stands accused of uploading documents to the internet that are not for the public. She repeated the instruction to, quote, put it in writing 2 more times, but they demanded to speak with me. She calmly closed the door on them. The stakeouts continued. On February 7th, 2019, the 3 elders staked down our property, with Mr. Werner Wiegraf driving his own personal car with the other 2 inside. I've obscured the license plate to protect his family, and here's a picture of the car. They took turns repeatedly knocking at our door over several hours, over 6 hours, before finally giving up and leaving. None of these men are legal. They're just elders in our local congregations being used to hound me. They are strangers to me. We have never associated with any Jehovah's Witnesses in this country, and there are laws in Europe that are being contravened by passing on our data to these religious church elders. On Saturday, February 23rd.
Well, what we'll do is we'll make that document available, but I think what we've heard already entirely, Leonard, I don't know what your thoughts are, but this seems to entirely contradict the claims made in Watchtower's document where they say, look, we're the good guys. We would never arrange for any kind of intimidation or bullying.
Yeah, definitely. If true, that belies their motivations. Whether or not a judge would consider those accusations relevant to Darkspilver's case, that's a little bit different argument, because we would need some kind of declaration or affidavit under oath from the party writing this letter, and who knows if that person would be willing to do that or something.
If they were willing to kind of go on record and issue an affidavit and everything, would that be admissible as evidence?
It would have to be relevant to the claims and defenses at issue, and as long as it's that and not hearsay or meets one of the exceptions, then yes, it should be admissible. It has to be authenticated or backed up by an actual witness or party authenticating that document. So that's another level of legal complexity, because I'm sure that person doesn't want to reveal their identity to the public, or at least would like to have that limited in some way. So there we have to have another hearing with the judge on whether and how much of the information can be revealed, whether the judge will accept the thing and admit it, even though the person wants to remain some kind of anonymous or pseudonymous.
Indeed, it adds another layer of complexity with the whole privacy issue, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So I think what we'll do now is, just to give us some time to digest what we've been discussing, we'll move on to the news shortly. Yes, we do have a news segment, even though Covert Fate isn't with us. So, Mark, if you could just prepare, Mark's going to do his very best to stand in here. But before we switch to the news, I've just got one more question for you, and it's a little off. It's not quite on this subject. It's kind of more broadly to do with copyright and free speech, Leonard. But many YouTubers, including myself, who regularly share Watchtower's content for the purpose of criticism, are concerned about the ramifications of Article 13, which was recently voted through by the European Parliament. Should we be worried that Watchtower will use this new legislation once it comes into force to further stamp out criticism?
It could be. I'm still... the EU copyright directive that contains Article 11 and 13, which I believe are now called Article 17, I'm a bit confused as to exactly what all of that is, but it still has not been implemented by the member states. And so we don't exactly know how the member states are going to implement the vague language in former Article 11 and 13. I'm holding out hope that they will implement it in some reasonable way, recognizing that they can't simply squash all user-generated content on the internet, that's going to lead to an economic difference, sort of like a trade deficit between the EU and non-EU countries who don't have to observe the limitations in Article 11 and 13. The opposite concern is that it will lead to a slippery slope and everyone will adopt the same rules or similar rules and then enforce them in a heavy-handed way. But
Indeed.
yes, I'm very concerned about the copyright directive because it's a movement towards limiting user rights, and I'm firmly on the side of user rights, that copyright benefits when people share and things like that, as long as it's not under very specific circumstances. We've seen some very true concerns about copyright and sharing and piracy, but those concerns seem to be overstated. There is a level of piracy that is damaging, and then beyond that, there seems to be a level of piracy that is helpful, and somewhere in there is the truth. But some copyright plaintiffs want all piracy eliminated at whatever expense, and many users would like all piracy to be unpunished, and they'd like to share wantonly. There is a reasonable, moderate answer to this problem somewhere in there.
Indeed. There's a balance that needs to be reached. And yeah, especially when I see what some people have been saying about these new directives, it does make me panic somewhat, because worst case scenario, I end up having to take down, for example, my rebuttals to Watchtower's copyrighted video propaganda, which I would absolutely be mortified to have to do. And by the way, this is just to bring in the live chat again. Christian,
it's a question that popped up on the chat.
Indeed, yeah. I actually noticed it come through. Christian said, "Hi Lloyd, how will the new European laws about fair use affect your channel, since there is now nothing called fair use?" Well, Leonard, I think I'm right in saying that fair use is unaffected. We're just waiting to see how these new directives are implemented.
Correct. I have not heard of these directives limiting fair use. It certainly could be a new conflict for courts to have to sort out. When is something in violation of former Article 11 or 13 or otherwise in violation of the copyright directive, when then the defendant is saying, no, this is a fair use? Will the courts adjudicate that in a reasonable way, or do they then wipe out fair use by going straight to, well, there's this new article and that somehow precedes or overrides? I don't see fair use going away or even being limited by that, but that doesn't mean that someone couldn't try.
Okay. And before just to give Mark a little bit more time to give us the most mind-blowing news reading that we've ever experienced, Javier, do you have any other questions from the live chat before we do that?
Yeah, there's a few. There's one here for Leonard from Great Dane. This is a direct question. It says, when appropriate, can you ask Mr. French which hat Mr. French is wearing? It's an inside joke amongst his subscribers. But obviously, we didn't have video before.
I'm not wearing a hat because I'm hot right now. I came in from the cold to the nice warm apartment, and I'm not going to be wearing my hat for a moment.
Fantastic.
I was wearing my
have,
Harris tweed flat cap with the ear flaps on it that everybody thinks is funny. At least everybody at the Harris tweed shop had never seen that before.
Leonard, let me, before we get into this news situation, I do want to ask you one question that you could better explain, I think, than anyone else. So one of the things that we noticed with the copyright issue is the fact, and this came up in this case as well, the fact that it appears that Watchtower has not gone to Washington, D.C. to register the majority of their documents in the past 15 to 20 years with the United States Copyright Office. And
Okay.
so this actually came up in the documents, and Watchtower defended that. And maybe you can comment on what the difference is between documents that are actually registered with the Copyright Office in DC and the rest of the documents, which it appears Watchtower has not registered.
Sure. There was a disagreement among the appellate courts in the United States for many years. We lawyers were complaining about this. Some circuits or some appellate circuits would require a copyright registration to be granted by the Copyright Office before any lawsuit can be maintained, while other appellate circuits would allow a lawsuit as long as a copyright had been filed, a registration had been filed and the fee paid. The application could be pending and you might not have a completed registration number with the Copyright Office, but as long as you made the application, that was enough. This was recently resolved in the Supreme Court case of Fourth Estate versus wall-street.com. And we went over this on our channel about a month ago. The court firmly fell on the side of copyright registration having been granted by the Copyright Office, even if it means that the case can't be filed for a few extra months. There was very little exception. The only exception, and that this is cited in Watchtower's opposition to the motion to quash, was that the chart was an unpublished copyright work, and disregarding the arguments against it, if that's true, then they might be able to file suit, or in this case ask for a subpoena, before the copyright application is actually granted. Now, there's a few cases from a few months ago with the Fortnite dances, of all things, where Carlton, for example, applied for a copyright registration and was denied. So it's still possible that the chart might not receive copyright registration if it has not already.
Well, Leonard, we're working on the premise that they are not applying for a copyright in these, and it appears that they have not. You can go to Washington, D.C. and see that, for example, if you look up the Elder's Manual, that's one of the few documents that they did register maybe back in 2010. But really, almost nothing has been registered by Watchtower of Pennsylvania since then. Nearly nothing at all.
Not even the flyer. I maybe I had it wrong, but I thought the flyer had been registered, or the magazine.
That's part of the magazine. Yeah.
So that would have registration, but the chart would not, and would need to be registered to maintain suit. So the argument would be that they can't get the subpoena because they haven't registered the copyright. Well, and then a counter argument would be that a DMCA 512H subpoena is not a lawsuit. So.
Well, we're live right now, so if we have an attorney watching that wants to look up the United States copyright, there's a website, and maybe they could go and just double check that for us. I know we have a few attorneys that watch the program.
Oh,
so I'd be willing to as well, but I've been kicked out of the TV room so that my girlfriend can watch TV while she's patiently awaiting me to finish this call.
So before we vanish too far down the copyright rabbit hole, as I mentioned at the beginning, we do not have Covert Fade in this episode. But his spirit lives on in the masterclass of news reading skill that Mark O'Donnell is about to attempt to give us. So it's time to cue the music. It's not very loud, is it?
It's coming on.
Okay.
All right. Well, I need to shuffle some papers here.
Majestic. You're looking majestic there, Mark.
All right. And now for the news. Raymond Hinches from Reclaimed Voices reports that last week a letter was read to all congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses in the Netherlands in response to the news that Utrecht University is conducting an investigation into the handling of child abuse allegations within the Jehovah's Witness organization.
Hold on a minute. You're saying that And by the way, I don't mean to kind of burst your balloon, because you were really putting on a fantastic newsreader voice there. But you're telling me that a letter was read out in all Dutch congregations telling Jehovah's Witnesses to participate into Utrecht University's independent investigation of child sex abuse.
That appears to be correct. So we have spoken to and were contacted by Reclaimed Voices this morning. This is literally something that happened within the past 3 hours that we were notified. And it has been validated by, I believe, 4 to 5 different sources. We actually did receive a copy of the letter in Dutch. We're not sharing the letter at this time, but we do have proper translation of that letter, and I can read that. It's as you stated, Lloyd, so this is a letter that was read apparently to all congregations in the Netherlands, and it's from the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses in the Netherlands. And it says, "Dear brothers and sisters, commissioned by the Ministry of Justice and Security, the University of Utrecht is conducting an investigation into the way in which Jehovah's Witnesses respond to accusations of child sexual abuse. This includes the way in which elders support victims of abuse and their families. If you are a victim of child abuse yourself, or you know someone who is a victim and you would like to complete a questionnaire for this investigation, you can find it in the website of Utrecht University." And it gives a URL where you can reach that website. It says, "Of course, participation in this study is a personal choice. Nevertheless, we hope that this will provide Utrecht University with accurate and balanced information on how our organization responds to abuse, which is both a repulsive sin and a crime. This announcement will be published on the notice board. Receive our warmest regards, your brothers, Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses."
And Mark, what I find fascinating about this is the timing, because Watchtower did not release this letter when the investigation got started. So, and this has been going on for weeks now, where Utrecht University has been, working away and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on and receiving stories, to the point where we now have hundreds of stories, apparently, that they've already accumulated outside of Reclaimed Voices. That is, these are stories that have been given to Utrecht University for their official investigation. And only when it's reported in the news media that they have literally hundreds of stories, does Watchtower then release this letter, which looks to me like some kind of strategy is going on here, where they're effectively trying to, I don't know, encourage witnesses to kind of bombard Utrecht University with positive statements. Am I being a bit too cynical here?
No, I think you're exactly right. And really, the first sentence says it all. So the first sentence in this letter says, "Commissioned by the Ministry of Justice and Security, the University of Utrecht is conducting an investigation." So I think that's worthy of mention, the fact that Watchtower in the Netherlands has recognized that they're up against a wall right now, because this is not just Utrecht University. This is commissioned by the Ministry of Justice, which is obviously a federal institution in the Netherlands. If they do not cooperate with and participate in this, or advise their members to participate, then it would be effectively like trying to get out of the Australian Royal Commission, for which they, we know very well what happened in 2015. They were effectively forced to participate in this, and a number of subpoenas were issued to Watchtower officials who gave evidence in that. So, so 2 things. Number one, it's a government institution, so they almost can't ignore this. And number 2, I think you're absolutely correct. They're trying to get ahead of this. And I would imagine that they would flood this investigation with cases where they probably are going to handpick individuals who say, "Oh yes, my investigation was handled properly and the police were notified." And
well, they do say, in fairness, that it's a personal choice. But right. Javier, I don't know what you think, that they're just not going to be getting bombarded with stories of abuse victims who are saying, "Oh yes, my case was handled superbly and immediately the authorities were notified."
I can imagine that there may be 1 or 2 cases. But given the numbers of the reports, and by the way, Reclaim Voices is on the live chat right now.
Oh, fantastic. Hi, Reclaim Voices. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I mean, especially because it's with abuse, and they have been mishandling it for so long that I can't imagine they're going to get a lot of people saying they've had positive experiences with the elders and with Watchtower and the way things have been handled, unless the people who do participate in the study are being cherry picked. I can't imagine that will be
inconceivable that some of them may lie. Theocratic warfare.
Yeah.
Are any of you aware of my story? I've shared it several times on my channel, but not recently, so I don't want to share the story if you guys know it already. But no. I was part of the Singing Boys of Pennsylvania, not a religious organization, but an organization that the director was later found to be abusing many of the boys in a sexual manner. And the relevant part of the story here is, it's an anecdote, so I do want to be careful about the fallacy of the individual anecdote, but I think it's very relevant, especially in the context here. I was asked by the district attorney to testify. My client was one of the boys that was abused, and me being in the organization formerly, I also had a perspective, so it was very coincidental and helpful to my client. Ultimately, my client was not the case that they were able to arrest and convict the director on. But I was asked to testify at his sentencing hearing. And there was a remarkable phenomena that it struck me to my core. I was the only person who spoke against the man. And more than a dozen individuals volunteered to speak in favor of the director, saying things about his contributions to the community, his musical talent, how many lives he had touched in a good way, and that all of this should somehow negate or minimize his incarceration or punishment for the sexual abuse that he was convicted of, that he pled guilty to.
He's a great musician, so he gets to abuse kids. How does that work?
Fortunately, the judge did not see it that way, saw it quite the opposite. He was a great musician, which meant he had access to children, which meant he abused the highest trust. So the judge did see it that way and pretty much threw the book at a now 80-some-odd-year-old man. So he'll be getting out of jail shortly, but he's served several years now. And he was only charged with 2 offenses plus a number of child pornography counts. But the most remarkable and disgusting thing was the attitudes of the people in support of him. They came out of the woodwork, and there was a dozen people who testified and dozens of supporters, and they gave sneers and jeers and tisks and tuts, and I'm not exaggerating in the slightest, at me and at anyone who was who was against the director. And I can't imagine that that's not going to happen here. If the organization literally says to their entire Dutch community, please cooperate, please talk to them about your personal experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's going to be a lot of people speaking out in support spontaneously, in my opinion, my personal opinion in that case.
Indeed. And actually what you're describing, we've seen in a number of cases. In fact, I'm thinking of Debbie McDaniel's story in particular. She, her case was eventually thrown out because of the statute of limitation had expired. But at the hearing in which that was being discussed, all of the local Jehovah's Witnesses, including her own parents, turned out and sat on the side of the perpetrator. So it's interesting to see that kind of abominable psychology repeated even outside of religion when it comes to the way people react to these outrageous abuses. Mark, we're kind of stealing your thunder a little bit.
No. This is. I'm glad you. That's a great story, Leonard. Thank you for sharing that. And absolutely, what Lloyd said too about Debbie's case. And I sat for nearly a week in Montana with not only will people show up to support an abuser, but they will show up to support the congregation or the organization that shelters the abuser. And that was the case in Montana, as well as Stephanie Fessler in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, where you had these individuals showing up to support the organization, and no one there was effectively there to support the victim. At least no one from the congregation was there to support the victim.
Hey, Mark, real quick before you proceed, I just wanted to make a comment that on the live chat, Reclaim Voices says, next month we are invited to share our findings with Utrecht University. So I just thought that was
wonderful,
a relevant point there.
I can see us having them back on the show soon. So yeah, we'll keep our fingers on that particular story as it develops. So Mark, please continue to wow us with this masterclass in newsreading.
Well, I can't fill the shoes of Covert Fade. So if you're listening, Covert Fade, shout out to you, buddy. We need you back here. But I got a couple more items here that are of interest. There's so much going on. I can't cover everything. But the Brussels Times newspaper or media outlet said that more than 70 victims of child sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses have come forward with their stories since the public network aired a documentary last week. And this is reported by Reclaim Voices Belgium. So, for those that don't know yet, I think we've talked about it recently, but Reclaim Voices is not only in the Netherlands now, but there is a Belgian Reclaim Voices. And so there was a documentary produced by a Belgian news agency. I think it was VRT News, if I'm not mistaken. So we might be able to produce a link, or we can post a link to it in the comments. But it's a fascinating documentary in which the Belgian media has gone and interviewed ex-Jehovah's Witness child sexual abuse victims, former elders, a doctor who ignored the education hate. This was a comment by Jason Wynn, who was also interviewed. So they went over to Ireland and interviewed the person who originated the Avoid JW whistleblowing site, Jason Wynn. So there's some great sections in English that you can go and listen to this documentary
I
in
believe
Belgium.
The whole thing has English subtitles now, the Pano documentary. And interestingly, it's been a double hit for Watchtower in that part of the world, because they've also had another documentary by their kind of investigative journalist team dealing with Reclaim Voices and sex abuse in the Netherlands. So it's really lighting up in that part of Europe right now.
Yeah, so what I did was, in the live chat, I've posted a link to the YouTube video, which, as you mentioned, has subtitles. So it's terrific, well done. And so a lot going on in Belgium, the Netherlands. And one final note that I thought was very comforting, and that is over in Australia, a lot went on. We mentioned the Australian Royal Commission from 2015. And we had two women that came forward, and they broke their silence. They were identified as BCB and BCG. And until recently, most people in the world didn't know who these victims were. But the victim who testified, who was called BCG, has not only decided to come forward with her real name and do an interview, but she has been appointed to the bar in Australia in an official ceremony last Monday. So her name is Shelley Breu. And she was interviewed by ABC News and I think some other outlets. And I just want to give a shout out to Shelley that, she's a very brave woman who suffered incredibly at the hands of the organization and the elders who covered up her abuse and wouldn't do a thing about it. And she's picked herself up by her bootstraps. She testified for the commission, was an incredible help to the commission. And now she's an attorney and, just can't wait to see what she does going forward. So congrats to Shelley.
Yeah, congratulations, Shelley. It really is. It's one thing to summon the bravery to kind of come forward and tell your story and make sure that there is justice for victims. But what's really inspiring about Shelley is she's gone one step, even one step further than that. And she's moving on with her life in this incredible way of becoming a lawyer, and really kind of empowering herself. So it's really a remarkable story what's going on there.
Yeah, imagine. I mean, we were all super impressed with Angus Stewart during the Australia Royal Commission, but just imagine this woman now at the plaintiff's desk against Watchtower in some case in the future. I mean, that's a remarkable story.
Indeed. So, Mark, thank you so much for taking us through some actually very interesting news items. We struggle on some shows, but this has been some quality news there, and read in a very competent way, should be mentioned. I'll mark your sheet G. So, returning to the subject at hand, perhaps before we go to our final, because what we do, Leonard, is we go around the panel and we just kind of share our thoughts in summary to what we've been discussing. I just want to reiterate that you've done a very extensive video, so I'm going to put a link in the description. Viewers, if you're interested in Leonard's kind of line-by-line analysis as a lawyer to Watchtower's objection, it's a fascinating video to sit through. So please check it out. Before we go to our summary, though, Javier, are there any other live chat questions that we can squeeze in?
Yeah, there's an interesting comment here from a Paul Kanzula. And I know I'll bring it up because Mark and I and you, we've discussed this in the past. But in regards to these subpoenas, he mentions what happened to waiting on Jehovah? If it's good enough for child molestation, why not the governing body?
That's actually. Can I just chip in here, because I prepared something that I've forgotten to mention, but I wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking about the hypocrisy element, because I do have some quotes here. In the July, I mentioned this in one of my latest videos, in the July 2019 Watchtower on page 10, it says, "When our enemies ban our worship, they hope to make us afraid to serve Jehovah. In addition to the ban, they may circulate false stories, send officials to search our homes, drag us to court, or even imprison some of us." So apparently it's bad for Jehovah's Witnesses to be dragged to court, but not so bad for the critics to be dragged to court over petty issues. I kid you not. In the March 2019 broadcast, and if you want to actually see these words being spoken, if you go to my rebuttal and jump to the 28-minute 19-second mark, quoting from John 18:36, where it says, "My kingdom is no part of this world," David Schaefer, a governing body helper, says, "Because Jesus' kingdom is not of human origin, it doesn't need human defenses." That's not quite what we're seeing here. We're seeing very human actions being taken by Watchtower.
I thought God created man in God's likeness.
Indeed. Yeah, so, gosh. And page 4, just finally, page 4 of the 2012 yearbook, this is in the governing body letter. So this is the governing body speaking to Jehovah's Witnesses now. "In some lands, your rights are being trampled underfoot by those who manipulate laws in order to frame trouble by decree," quoting from Psalm 94:20-22. "Realizing that Jesus foretold such persecution, you are enduring courageously and looking to Jehovah as your refuge." Just to kind of highlight the utter hypocrisy of what Watchtower is doing here.
Lloyd, I remember a couple of months back when you guys analyzed some of the videos from the conventions and all that stuff. And I remember the video of the kid that was looking at the illustrations in the book, and he was concerned who was going to help us fight. And the elder in the video tells him, we won't need to fight. Well, apparently that doesn't apply to legal cases, and it doesn't apply to copyright infringement cases or cease and desist letters or any of this stuff. In those situations, forget that you won't need to fight when maybe your life is in danger. But yeah, don't post copyrighted material that's critical of the organization, because then they'll fight.
There's definitely a limit as to how much waiting on Jehovah Watchtower is prepared to do, it seems. So are there any maybe another question we can squeeze in, or should we go to our summary comments?
I think we can go to the comments. I mean, there's, for the sake of time, there's a few questions, but yeah.
But thank you so much to all of you. I mean, I keep glancing at the YouTube page. I have to keep it on the Hangouts page, so I'm not too distracted. But I do glance at the YouTube page, and we currently have over 530 watching, which is just fantastic. And thank you to all of you for tuning in on your Saturday, no less, to listen to us talk about copyrights. Fantastic. So, Mark, could we perhaps start with your summary comments?
Yeah, Lloyd, I think a lot's been said, and actually a lot hasn't been said. So we'll try to post some links to the documents, because the statement made by the Redditor, Darkspilver, he made a pretty impassioned statement in his documents prior to Watchtower's opposition. And, he made the statement that, look, he's just trying to exercise his First Amendment freedom of speech, which he is, and he's commenting on Watchtower's request for money, which, as we all know, they are, they're always making pleas for money, more so than when I was ever growing up. Now you can slide a credit card, you can go online, you can use the app. And then Stephen Lett comes online and he says things like more money's going out than is coming in. So then you have these letters read in congregations. So, he has every right to state that, and showing evidence of it in the form of that piece of the Watchtower that he shared is absolutely fair use. So, so I just want to say that, it'd be good for everyone to read what he had to say, but then also to read what Watchtower's rebuttal to this was. And what I found interesting is that for those that don't know this, Watchtower they're not just looking for a few isolated things on Reddit or YouTube, but, they are scouring the internet. And part of the evidence packet in this particular case was all of these quotations from people who had commented on and even said some things, some pretty vulgar language towards Paul Polidoro.
They said something really interesting actually along those lines, Mark. They said,
yeah, go ahead, please.
They said we weren't interested in Darkspilver's criticism until he started infringing our copyright. Well, yes. They're not going to know that he is infringing their copyright unless they're interested enough to be monitoring what he's got to say. So how can they say they're not interested when, in order to know that he's infringing their copyright, they have to have at least some level of interest?
So, yeah, and the conclusion of Watchtower's rebuttal here says, Darkspilver's unsupported claim that Watchtower is misusing the DMCA in order to silence religious dissenters and critics is simply not true. The fact of the matter is that over 34,000 Reddit XJW subreddit subscribers have been able to openly express their views without interference by Watchtower. Darkspilver's speech only became a concern to Watchtower when his speech crossed the line to copyright infringement.
That's the word, yeah, it concerned. Yes. It was only of a concern to us, yeah.
So, right, it's exactly what you said there. So I find it interesting that they made multiple references to the fact that the group, the XJW Reddit, went from something like 28, 29,000 when this all started to over 34,000. So Watchtower actually made the argument that free speech is doing very well in the XJW community, because in the span of time from when Darkspilver started posting to the present time when this document was written, there were more than 6,000 people added to the XJW Reddit. And they're saying, hey, we believe in free speech, no problem. We're only concerned when it violates copyright. But the reality is we know what happens when someone speaks out about Watchtower. They are sanctioned, they are disfellowshipped, and they'll use every possible means to even find an alternate way of disfellowshipping that person. not just for apostasy, but they'll find some other sneaky way to get rid of a person, to silence them. I mean, look what they did. When they knew that Barbara Anderson was going to go live with her 2002 Dateline, they disfellowshipped her immediately before that show went live. And I don't know if we had a chance to talk about it. You mentioned the Atlantic article, which was released a few weeks back, and that was published on a Friday morning at 7 a.m. 24 hours later, there were 2 elders at my door, and they were there again today at my door, banging for 10 straight minutes.
Well, since you've mentioned that, Mark, I didn't know you were going to mention that. Are you able to show the photograph, or legally?
Yeah, sure. So let's see if we can pull that up, and we'll do a screen share here.
Because they evidently
you need a
know they're
doorbell
on
cam for that.
Yeah, he does. That's
He
the
does,
great
yeah.
thing. He does have a doorbell cam. And you need it when you're in his position, yeah.
Yeah, I've got multiple cameras going here. So let me see. Let's do this, and then let's see if we can do a screen share.
Yes, excellent, and also very sorry to hear that you have to do that.
Well, that's the reality of criticizing Watchtower. Yeah, you have to kind of cover all your bases, and that's what Mark's doing. Yeah, his business has been ruined due to doing the activism work he's doing. So yeah,
and it's not a one-off, right? It's
yeah, this is unfortunate. Is that coming up on your screen?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, we see it.
Well,
that is creepy as heck.
So that happened just a few hours ago. And the sad thing is, and this is really sad. So I mentioned to you that the Atlantic article came out maybe, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago on a Friday. 24 hours later, the 2 of them were at her door. And, the gentleman in the front is the elder who married my wife and I. And I will say I've had many conversations with him. He's well aware of a, child abuse situation in the organization. He's handled cases where he told me one guy that, was a friend of mine, used to be an elder. He told me he'd never, ever be an elder again. And we later learned that this individual was involved in some form of child pornography, and that, it wasn't reported to the police, to our knowledge. They handled it all internally. So, that's bad enough. And he's aware of multiple other situations. But the gentleman standing behind him, this is the saddest of all, that his daughter, I'm not going to name any names, and the Atlantic article covered a number of abuse cases, and one of the abuse cases was an abuser by the name of Luis Ancinco, and I can mention his name because he's deceased, and also I have court documents of 2 court cases in which he was sued for sexual assault of at least 7 women. This is the man that I referred to. Now, let me just go back. This man named Ancinco is the man who sexually assaulted at least 9 women that I know of, 7 that were involved in a court case. And his victims, one of his victims was this man's daughter in the black coat. So this man, he's literally coming to my door 24 hours after the Atlantic article, and he is the father of a victim of a man named in the article, but even worse, a father of a victim who was mentioned in the article. But even worse, the same daughter of this man was also sexually molested by an elder, a completely separate elder who was of the anointed, who ended up, to my knowledge, assaulting several dozen Jehovah's Witness kids that I grew up with and was in close association with. And it was all covered up by the elders. So this poor man's daughter, 2 people assaulted his daughter, and it was all covered up. They said, we're going to leave the matter in Jehovah's hands. And, I don't know what to say other than, they're coming to talk to me.
What's interesting, I mean, just to kind of, we're going to have to drag it back to the issue at hand shortly. But what's interesting for me, Mark, is that, because you've been communicating this to us, and I know slightly more about the lengths that they've been going to contact you, and they've even been texting you, and you've been very civil and polite with them when they've texted, and said, "Oh yeah, sure, let's arrange a conversation. Let's arrange to get together, with our families, for example." So they know how to reach you. They know how to communicate with you, but for some reason they're only happy calling when it's unannounced and when they can catch you off guard. That's what I find most disingenuous about all this.
So that's a very good point, Lloyd. And I have to tell you, I've been on the other side of the fence, not as an elder, but as a ministerial servant, and I've been with those guys when we went looking for people, not necessarily people that were going to be disfellowship, but people who hadn't been attending meetings. And it was really creepy. And it's one of the reasons that I never really wanted to be an elder, because these guys were taking me along on shepherding calls, but they were also breaking off in the field ministry to go track down some individual that they wanted information on, or they had not been in touch with for some time, and they heard that they were involved in some kind of conduct. And it was all very creepy. It was very invasive, and it just left a poor taste in my mouth. Indeed. That I just didn't want to be involved with it. So the irony is that now they're banging on my door. But look, for the public, for the record, my issue is with the policies of the organization with reference to child abuse. So if they're going to come after me for what I've said about child abuse, then by all means, please do so, because it's only going to get national attention. It's already, I've already been featured in the Atlantic article, and I can only imagine that if they're doing what I think they're doing, it's going to get a lot more attention that they don't want.
Indeed. For the record, if the elders happen to be watching, if you guys want to speak to Mark on a video conference with myself or my YouTube viewers, you'd be more than welcome. So that offer's on the table.
Actually, it turns out it says Mark elders are on the live chat right now.
Oh,
so
fantastic! But returning to the issue at hand, and this does sort of relate, because we heard that story from Fader before, who describes being stalked by elders, and what you've just told us, Mark, kind of supports that, if only anecdotally. But Javier, can you give us your kind of some summary thoughts on what we've been discussing as regards copyright and the way Watchtower is using this subpoena warfare to track people down?
Well, yeah. So I think Watchtower is going to use the legal system to bully people. I don't know how many of these, Mark, you probably know better than I, but how many of these subpoena orders have gone out. But it's scary to receive a legal document like that, especially if you're a person that doesn't have resources to hire legal representation or be involved in courts. And sometimes these big corporations, that's all they do, is they send these official letters to people, and they'll beat people into submission. So there's two things that I glean from that. Is one, all of this work, all of this activism, the leaking of documents, the online videos, the documentaries, the films, the news reports, all of this stuff is poking Watchtower in the eye. And this is their reaction to it. So the fact that we're seeing this is unfortunate for the people receiving the subpoenas and the documents and the harassment, but it is good for. I'm sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Flash. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's
I'm
good
showing
for
you a list there, Javier. If you can see that, that's
it only works when you're talking, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll let you continue, Javier. So just to your point, you asked how many of these subpoenas. So I'm beginning to lose space on my computer.
Holy mackerel.
And yeah, this is it just in the past year and a half. And by the way, I checked today. Another one was just posted today against a subpoena was just issued to an individual, a Spanish-speaking individual who's posted information related to Watchtower's theocratic schools. So they consider that a private document. So yet another one was signed late yesterday, and we'll have more on that to come. I think most of these are posted on voidjw.org, but I just wanted to show you guys the extent of it. Every single one of these I've examined, and including we've talked about the Kevin McFree case, which he is fighting. He is the individual who produces the Lego videos, And so he's gotten a very good law firm to defend him, and Watchtower is very aggressively going after him. In fact, they've hired a law firm, Cohen, Leibowitz, and Latman, to go after Kevin McPhee and to fight his motion to quash their subpoena. So we have a case going on the East Coast and a case going on the West Coast with Reddit. And so this is just an example. They aren't giving up anytime soon. They're going after these individuals.
So Javier, we just returning to your summary thoughts before I move on to mine.
Yeah. So thanks, Mark, for showing that. But yeah, so to my point, all of this work is affecting how they're reacting to the Jehovah's Witness community and the complaints on child sexual abuse and shunning and everything. It's just their response right now is aggressive, right? They're trying to do damage control, and they're trying to quash and stop criticism and do all that stuff. And that's obvious, right? They're going to come after people. But it should be a sign. It's funny that we go to this place, Lloyd, because we talk about the persecution complex that Jehovah's Witnesses have when they're in. But the fact that they're going after these people means the work is having an effect. Yeah. So it's encouraging from that point of view to be like, hey,
we're not
this in vain.
But we're not saying that our persecution is proof that we're God's one true people. We're just saying our persecution is proof that our efforts are stinging them. And it's evidence that we're on the right track. So indeed,
I just want to encourage everyone to keep pressing on, keep going forward.
Indeed, that's what I was going to say in my comments just before we go to Leonard for his concluding comments. And actually, Leonard, if you could kind of weigh in on this to some extent as well, because a lot of people watching this will be watching it because they're worried about themselves, and rightly so. They're thinking, hang on a minute, here we have a so-called Christian loving, peaceful religion that is using copyright law to hunt people down, find out who they are, seemingly with the intent of either intimidating them or ruining their lives through family estrangement. Now, the message that I want to make clear, and I think we made this clear when we were last dealing with the subject, is that if you are physically in, mentally out, in other words, if you are within the organization, you're not making public the fact that you are quote unquote apostate, but you are doing what you can from within this prison, either to participate on forums or to share what information you have available. Please do not think that you must stop. Okay, do not allow Watchtower to intimidate you into silence, because if you do, then they have won. Right now, they're not winning. And this desperation is proof that we are winning. But if you interpret this as instruction for you to stop, that you need to wind down operations, then Watchtower wins. In truth, how this needs to be interpreted, if you are inside the organization and you're interested in sharing information or involving yourself in the conversation, it just means that you've got to be careful. And that if there is important information that needs to be leaked, you need to share it responsibly and in a way that you cannot be traced, even if it means involving a third party. Like here at JW Survey, we've received a lot of leaked information, and we've been able to disseminate it without anyone, as far as I'm aware, suffering as a result. So there are avenues available, but I'm mindful of the fact that there will be lots of worried people watching this show. Leonard, what would be your advice to them?
Sure. I actually had two questions first.
Sure.
One, do we know whether Watchtower or Jehovah's Witnesses uses confidentiality agreements with their members?
Oh, this came up in your show.
Yeah, Scientology does.
Yeah, you actually raised the point that there would be more of an issue if Darkspilver had been made to sign a contract pledging confidentiality. And the interesting thing is that no, Jehovah's Witnesses aren't required to sign confidentiality.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then at least there's that. There's no contract avenue with which the organization could come after someone. So
it might be different if he was working at the facilities, but Darkspilver, as far as I'm aware, is not a Watchtower staff member. So yeah.
It may still be able to be overcome even if someone does have a confidentiality agreement, depending upon what they're sharing and how, like you said before, about whistleblower laws and everything like that.
Well, Leonard, there is quickly, there's a terms of use on their website, so maybe you can comment on that, because obviously when someone reads JW.org website, they have terms of use and they have a lot of fine print in there regarding what you can and can't do. So I think one of their arguments would be if you take something from their website, like such as a Watchtower article or a quote, then if you do something with it, you're violating their terms of use.
They could make that argument, although the terms of use really only govern people who are using the website and how they use the website. When the terms go beyond the website, judges are going to be a little more skeptical of that. But it could be something where the terms are seen as a binding agreement. The second question I had, not that I'm some great interviewer of church leaders or anything, but I was in a Protestant organization for 23 years, and so I keep in touch. And everyone that I speak to, every church leader, including ones outside of the organization I was in, are speaking about a tremendous decline in youth membership. Do you know if the Jehovah's Witness organization is also experiencing a decline in youth or younger members, in other words, not able to renew their congregation as easily as they used to?
It's difficult. There is definitely something happening because the membership numbers have stagnated in recent years. In 2 successive years, the growth percentage has been only 1.4%, which, when you factor in the birth-death ratio, that's basically just at a standstill.
Yeah.
We don't get enough data from Watchtower to know exactly what age groups are affected, but anecdotally, we're hearing of greatly reduced attendances at Kingdom Halls and congregations merging. So it could be even that there's a little bit of manipulation going on with the figures that are officially presented. But the short answer is that we simply don't have enough information to be able to know about the age groups. Yeah.
So my thoughts then are that this sounds an awful lot like, I don't mean a death rattle as in the Jehovah's Witness organization is going to die, but I just mean a death rattle as in that energetic period where one is confronting tremendous change, and they may not understand how to handle it properly. If there are elders listening here, I understand that I'm not a member in the organization, but I can tell you that human psychology likes transparency, likes hope, likes growth, likes a community. And control is not community. Abuse is not community. Hiding abuse is worse than some of the abuse, even sometimes, depending upon how it's hidden and all that. That can do just as much damage as the initial abuse. Again, I'm not trying to characterize or minimize anyone's experience. I'm just saying that these are tremendously horrible things. And I don't understand how a person couldn't look at their congregation and see, if I may become religious for a moment, see through Jesus' eyes. And Jesus was a hopeful, a contributor, a almost creator. He wanted positive things. He was able to handle criticism. He was able to handle negative without destruction, except for that one time in the temple. This just isn't, it doesn't really strike a what would Jesus do kind of, and I know that's not their slogan or anything, but it does not really strike a biblical or Christian message chord with me. I really don't see this as what I was brought up with as a positive religious organization. Rather, this seems more like a, dare I say, viral organization. I don't like the cult word, but the virality of a very controlling authoritarian way of thinking If you don't agree with us, then we have to shut you out and pretend you don't exist, not incorporate any alternate message or critical message, because why? What reason could there be? Well, they're afraid of the consequences of hearing that. And how much truth and foundation can there really be in an organization that needs to, or that has to avoid criticism, that has to avoid shouldn't a strong Christian be able to face Satan and not be tempted? And is it the church's duty to prevent us from ever facing temptation or ever facing Satan or ever facing a critical situation? Shouldn't Christianity or shouldn't the church be building strong members who can serve the church, who can knock on your door, frankly, and not be shunned because they sound like they're nuts? They should be able to maintain a conversation and speak extemporaneously on a level of humanity that reaches, that connects with the public, the non-members, instead of avoiding the non-members. It's a very strange way of thinking, and so the only conclusion that I can come to, and then of course you throw in this tenuous copyright claim, is that they're afraid of something, and of course you've discussed all the things they're afraid of.
Indeed,
Well said.
very well said, especially coming from an outsider. Yeah, that means an awful lot to, I'm sure, everyone listening. It's nice to know we're not alone, and it's nice to know that the outside world gets it. And if you can get it, maybe the judge in this case, I know you said in your video that you've heard of the judge before in Darkspilver's case, and your recollection is that it's a fair judge, and maybe they will reach the same conclusions that you've reached, who knows. But just to kind of go back to my earlier question of what would be your advice to viewers who are watching this, who are terrified of Watchtower coming after them if they post more or less anything on Reddit or elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, first, my first message is take care of yourself. You're not useful to anyone if you are not first taking care of yourself. So, one, you can't make that rational decision about how to speak publicly or how to maintain your anonymity if you're not thinking clearly for yourself. So, one, take care of yourself, calm down. If you're in panic mode about it, then it's okay to back off for a moment. I would say reach out to organizations like yourself. There's like this other organization, as you said, was watching. I forget its name again. I would say reach out to these organizations privately before speaking publicly, and I'm sure that you have some suggestions. It seems like you've also been available as a conduit many times. There has to be more than one of you. There's probably other attorneys as well who are willing to be a conduit for someone who wants to come. Who has to figure out how to speak publicly or critically on the matter. There are technical ways to mask one's identity online without breaking laws or without being reachable by a subpoena or things like that. But those technical things are really not the big obstacles. The big obstacles are the fear and doing it properly so that one is protected. I would definitely encourage people, hearing all of this, not to act recklessly or wantonly. It does seem, so from my time in just a Protestant organization, which doesn't have any prohibition on speaking to ex-members or anything like that, there's a sense of community when you're part of an organization like that. And I can completely understand why a member would not want to destroy their own community. It's not that the member is destroying the community, and it's not like when I walk down the street alone at night wearing or carrying some expensive item that I'm inviting robbery. It's still the robber's fault. It's still the church's fault for disfellowshipping you and excommunicating you and having that sort of policy. But the users members, too much online. The members do understand what the church is going to do if they catch a member behaving in a critical way. So it's completely understandable that they would that someone would not want to or would be concerned about having their identity revealed. And I hope that the judge takes Darkspilver's identity as seriously in this case. I haven't seen whether the judge is going to hold the oral arguments, but if I recall correctly, there was an oral argument date set. It usually has to be set either when you file a motion for quash or when you file an opposition. It's just general motions practice in federal court. So there might actually be a hearing date on this as well. And someone could attend that hearing date, from a public perspective, to talk about what happened there.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now, Leonard, and so there is looks like okay, April 1st has come and gone. So it says here that the clerk's notice changing the time of hearing. Notice is given that the motion hearing to quash subpoena set for May the 6th, 2019. It will be held at 11 a.m. in San Francisco, courtroom C, 15th floor, before Magistrate Judge Sallie, Sallie Kim, Kim. So that's a hearing on May the 6th. And then let's see here. We have the opposition response was filed. I'm looking to see if there's any other dates. So it appears that that date of May the 6th is currently on the docket.
Yeah.
Unless something changes.
And there should be an upcoming response from the Electronic Frontier Foundation or Darkspilver through Electronic Frontier Foundation, usually within 7 days or 14 days. I don't know the local court rules for that specific court, but they could be looked up, and it's usually 7 or 14 days that they have to respond to the opposition then.
Will you be responding to that on your channel?
Yeah, we'll keep track of that. And definitely, I intend to cover this sort of thing more on my channel as well. I honestly, hearing your, lack of a better word, enthusiasm for the subject, I was a bit surprised. I did not realize how much attention was on this issue.
Indeed. Well, I'm just mindful, everyone, of the fact that we've been speaking for over 2 hours now, and that seems to tell me that we should draw things to a conclusion. But I cannot express enough how meaningful and insightful your insights have been, Leonard. Thank you so much for coming on the channel and sharing.
And thank you for having me.
And please, viewers, do check out Leonard's channel. I have put a link in the description, so head on over there, and yeah, you will not be disappointed at his depth of knowledge on this issue. Thanks also to Javier Ortiz and Mark O'Donnell, aka John Redwood.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thanks, Lloyd. It's always fun.
We're coming up on 25 episodes of Watchtower in Focus soon, so I can't believe how time has flown since 2017. So it's been great talking to all of you guys.
Time flies when you're exposing a cult. So, viewers, I do hope you have enjoyed this channel. Just another quick word. Please do not panic. Do not let this intimidate you or scare you. There are ways around this. Reach out to JW Survey if you have information to share. Reach out to Faith Leaks. There are plenty of avenues if you need to get information out. But that's all we have time for. I do hope you have enjoyed our conversation. I know I have. Please don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. And as always, thank you for watching.